Welcome to the Real News Network. I'm Paul Jay. We're continuing our discussion with Ali Hashem. He was a correspondent in the Middle East for Arabic Al Jazeera, and he joins us again from Beirut. Thanks for joining us, Ali.
You're welcome.
And I urge you to watch part 1 and part 2 of the interviews, because we're just going to pick up our conversation from where we left off. So, Ali, one of the concerns you expressed after you resigned was about Al Jazeera's coverage of Bahrain. Can you speak about that?
Actually, everyone around the Arab world, I'd just like to say this, everyone around the Arab world, from Morocco till Oman till, Syria, everyone was thought that Al Jazeera is kind of holding his own dreams, embracing his dreams, and, as the voice of the voiceless, as they said before. But the problem is in Bahrain precisely there was a big problem because Bahrain is a Gulf kingdom, and everyone over there, it's like 80% of the people or 70% of the people are anti-government. So the government represents a minority in the country, where a big number of its people are really revolting against the regime. But given that this regime is a Sunni regime, and those who are doing the revolution are Shia, then it seems like they're not allowed to have their voice on air. So the Bahraini revolution was muted by, it's not only Al Jazeera, most of the Arab channels muted the Bahraini revolution, and it seems like people should be killed in Bahrain without having anyone asking for them. There should be no account for those who are killing those people in Bahrain. At the same time, the revolution was going on, and still it is still going on daily basis. The Saudi forces went into Bahrain, and no one was talking about the whole issue. It was kind of external factors were going inside, and things were deteriorating. But I don't know. There was a reason why all the Arab media channels, or most of them, were not covering this issue. It's kind of a sectarian maybe reason. I don't know. It's maybe because most of the Arab media capitals are being paid in the Gulf, and this is a Gulf state. So in case a Gulf state falls, then the other Gulf states are going to fall. Maybe this is the reason. I don't know why.
The coverage of Al Jazeera on Bahrain seemed kind of up and down. Well, on the whole, it certainly didn't cover Bahrain as much as it did, say, the Egyptian revolution, or certainly not Libya. There was, for example, a documentary they produced about Bahrain that did win an award and did critique the suppression of the protesters. There was the odd story.
People fighting for democratic rights broke the barriers of fear, only to find themselves alone and crushed. This is their story, and Al Jazeera is their witness.
So how does this work, that you get some coverage and then you get coverage pulled down and then you get lack of coverage? I mean, what is that dynamic?
Actually, the main coverage of Al Bahrain was by Al Jazeera English and not Al Jazeera Arabic. Al Jazeera English, really, the guys over there made a great work. This documentary it was really a very strong documentary documenting what's really going on. Actually, they had several reporters, who were kind of doing secret reporting from Bahrain, and they were really sacrificing their own security for the sake of their own career and their own of really good journalism. But the problem is the Arabic Al Jazeera wasn't really doing that much for Al Bahrain. It was like there is something going on in the country, and we shouldn't say anything about it. And this is really annoying, to know that you are dealing with revolutions and people according to your own political agenda. So you're supporting people's struggle in Syria, and I don't have a problem with supporting anyone. I mean, I would not the issue of support covering anyone. I don't have a problem with this issue. Whenever there are things going on, incidents going on, and my job as a journalist is covering this issues and not supporting these issues. But the problem is we were supporting in some places and doing the cover over the other movements in other countries. So it's kind of, it was, as I said before, politicization of media once again. It's because of the bilateral relations. We do not support the covering what's happening in Bahrain. Why? Because of the bad bilateral relations between Syria and Qatar now, we should go to the end in covering the Syrian stories, and we should go, till even sometimes some people are really right now accusing Al Jazeera of kind of staging some reports. I really can't say anything about this issue precisely because, everyone have the right to accuse, and at the same time Al Jazeera have the right to refute such accusations. But, it's arriving at a point when people accuse us of staging things, that's really a big problem. I just give an example of other stations who are really till this hour working from Damascus, and no one is talking to them. At the same time, from Bahrain, Al Jazeera had a big access to go to Bahrain, but they didn't send any reporter at this time. Before they might have sent twice. Once someone from the general manager's office, he's a journalist, he was sent there, and he did some reports from Manama. It was kind of things are being solved in this regard.
I once did a search in WikiLeaks. I searched the whole database. I had access to it, and I did a search for Al Jazeera. And it's a very interesting arc of the history there, because during the Afghan war, one of the WikiLeaks talks about how the king of Bahrain was joking with the American ambassador, saying, one of these days when you're bombing Afghanistan, why don't you take out the Al Jazeera office at the same time? And then they kind of did that in Baghdad, where they did attack an Al Jazeera office, and some Al Jazeera reporters were killed. They being the U.S. But then there's a WikiLeaks, one of the cables talks about a meeting that takes place in Washington somewhere around 2008. Although actually before I go to this story, let me back up once more. There's also a story that just prior to the 2004 elections, when bin Laden sends his letter to the Americans, that there's a report by CBS that only CBS carried this report, only on their website, and I saw this nowhere else, but I later did confirm this with people who I know, that Al Jazeera sent the bin Laden tape to the White House, to the Bush White House, to be reviewed, and they negotiated what could be released on the Friday, because the election was the following Tuesday. So they only released certain segments of the bin Laden letter to the Americans that the White House signed off on the Friday. On the Monday, they released in text the whole bin Laden letter, but by that point it had already missed the news cycle, and it was only in text, not the video. So only portions of the letter that, in my opinion, wound up helping Bush and not hurting him were released. Then jump ahead. Then apparently in WikiLeaks, not apparently, I saw this myself in WikiLeaks, I believed around 2008, and on this I have to go check my notes, but I believe it's with Hillary Clinton. There is a meeting between the leadership of Al Jazeera, Arabic, and the foreign minister of Qatar, and the WikiLeaks said it's a very good meeting, and the description of it is now it's clear now that Al Jazeera is going to be a voice for Qatari foreign policy.
Okay.
And Hillary Clinton starts saying good things about Al Jazeera. About something like about a year later, she starts talking about Al Jazeera as a very good news source.
Yeah.
I mean, how much of all this comings and goings affected you as a reporter? Did you see a kind of change in orientation?
No, actually, to be frank, no, we didn't touch such things, because these things are really very big. It's not our own things, because in general, the most thing that we can hear about is something like do this or don't do this, say this, but it's not like we will know what's really going on with the Americans, what's going on between the Qataris and Al Jazeera directly. It's not it's not what we have access to. We don't have access to such things. Actually, even in Al Jazeera till the end of my duties with them, they were always kind of trying to show us as reporters, put aside this issue that happened in Wadi Khalid that I spoke about. They were trying their best to show us as reporters that they have really good confidence in us as journalists, and they don't have any problem with any story. But the stories, then if you send the story, then the problem is in other places. It's not directly with your boss. then you'll just hear about other problems in other places, inside the newsroom, the way they're dealing with the coverages. So the things that you were saying, I don't know anything about them, because actually I don't have access to such information. I wished I have such information so that I can say something about it.
That's okay. So over the course of these interviews, our discussions, we've been very critical about Al Jazeera, and I think to be fair, we better talk about the other side too, because there is another side.
Yeah, that's
which
right,
compared to most of the other media organizations in the world, the preponderance of Al Jazeera coverage is pretty good, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, actually, let me say something. Al Jazeera, from the year 1996 till 2011 was maybe I can say the Arab idol of media. Everyone was looking towards Al Jazeera, and we used to every journalist used to dream to be working with Al Jazeera. That's something obvious. Actually, even with other stories, for example, when in my time when I was working also with them, for example, when I went to Somalia and did some stories, it was kind of great. Everyone was happy. Al Jazeera was going to places where no one dares to go, and they were trying their best to show some problems of those people, of the people who are really oppressed by whatever regimes, so etc., etc., etc. Even their own coverage, for example, of the Gaza war, the war on Lebanon before. So, but the real problem was this coverage of the Arab Spring. It's not really my problem directly. Actually, it's the problem in the street. Everyone is talking about this issue. Some people are really happy with Al Jazeera covering in this way, but they are just turning to other channels to get more credible news, because they know that Al Jazeera is on their own side. So they need to listen from a kind of a credible side or a neutral side, the real stories, because they think that Al Jazeera might really exaggerate a bit in such stories. Others who are on the other side and they are against Al Jazeera will also watch sometimes Al Jazeera, but will change to other neutral stations to know really what is really going on. So the problem is Al Jazeera in this 1 year, in the last 1 year, unfortunately sacrificed its own credibility for nothing. Everyone is kind of saying that Al Jazeera is committing suicide, and this is the biggest disaster I really feel happening in the Arab media. It's kind of a plight of the Arab media.
Thanks very much for joining us, Ali.
You're most welcome.
And thank you for joining us on the Real News Network.